"Mommy Grace, are you here?" The whisper cut through the morning mist like a prayer meant only for the dead. Richard Collins froze on the gravel path, white lilies trembling in his grip, as he watched two small figures huddled against his wife's marble headstone, their torn coats dark with dew, their breath visible in the cold December air. Welcome back, my amazing family. Before we dive into today's story, don't forget to hit that subscribe button, give this video a thumbs up, and let me know in the comments where you're watching from. Your love and support mean the world, and trust me, you don't want to miss what's coming next. Now, let's get right into the story. The cemetery gates groaned open at exactly 6:47 a.m., the same time Richard Collins arrived every Tuesday and Friday morning. Punctuality had built his empire. Routine had kept him breathing after Grace died. He stepped out of the black Mercedes, its engine purring to silence behind him as frost crunched beneath his Italian leather shoes. The boutique on Fifth Avenue had wrapped the lilies in cream-colored paper tied with silk ribbon, Grace's favorites, though she'd always pretended to scold him for spending money on flowers that would only wilt. "Buy books for the library instead," she'd say, then press her face into the blooms anyway, inhaling deeply with her eyes closed. 3 months. 92 days since the accident. Since the police officer stood in his office doorway, hat in hand, voice carefully neutral as he explained about the truck that ran the red light, the impact, the instantaneous nature of her death, as if that word, instantaneous, could somehow soften the blow. Richard walked the familiar path past monuments to forgotten industrialists and marble angels weeping over children who died a century ago. Oak trees stood sentinel, their bare branches clawing at the pearl-gray sky. He'd purchased 2 plots on the hill overlooking the pond where swans glided in summer, one for Grace, one for himself. The thought of eternity beside her had once seemed romantic. Now it was simply the only future he could imagine. But this morning, something was different. As he rounded the final turn, his steps faltered. Through the morning fog, he could make out his wife's headstone, the pink granite he'd commissioned from Vermont, engraved with her full name, Grace Elizabeth Collins, beloved wife, 1985 to 2024. Below that, the words he'd chosen after 3 sleepless nights, she taught the world to see with its heart. And there, pressed against the cold stone like moths seeking warmth, were 2 children. Girls. Identical twins, he realized as he drew closer. They couldn't have been more than 8 years old, though malnutrition had clearly stolen inches from their frames. Their hair, wild, uncombed, the color of dark honey, hung in tangles past their shoulders. One wore a pink coat 3 sizes too large, the zipper broken. The other's jacket was blue, the sleeves frayed to threads. Neither wore proper shoes. Their feet were wrapped in layers of plastic bags and duct tape. Richard's heart lurched. In another life, his life before Grace, he might have called security, had them removed from the premises with clinical efficiency. But Grace had changed him, or at least begun to. She dragged him to soup kitchens on Thanksgiving, made him read to children at the public library, forced him to see the faces behind the statistics his company's quarterly reports reduced to footnotes. Girls. His voice came out gentler than intended, softened by the sacred silence of the cemetery. Are you lost? The one in the pink coat jerked her head up, eyes wide with terror. She grabbed her sister's arm, and both scrambled to their feet, ready to bolt like startled deer. Wait, Richard said, lowering himself to one knee despite the damp ground that would ruin his $1,000 suit. He set the lilies carefully on the grass. I'm not going to hurt you. I promise. The blue jacket twin, slightly taller, though only by perhaps half an inch, positioned herself in front of her sister. Protective. Her jaw set with a determination that seemed impossibly fierce for someone so small, so clearly terrified. "This is our mommy's grave," she said, her voice cracking with cold and defiance. "We have permission to be here." The word struck Richard like a physical blow. He looked at Grace's headstone, then back at the children, his mind struggling to process what he'd heard. "Your mommy," he repeated slowly. The pink coat girl peered around her sister, tears streaming down her dirt-smudged cheeks. "Mommy Grace. She promised she'd always watch over us. We came to tell her we're sorry." Richard's vision blurred. The cemetery seemed to tilt around him. Grace had no children. They tried for years, endured 3 miscarriages that had left them both hollow and grieving. They'd talked about adoption, but Grace's charity work had consumed so much time, and he'd been building Collins Industries into what it was today. There had always been tomorrow, they'd told themselves. Until suddenly there were no tomorrows left. "I think there's been a mistake," he said carefully, though his pulse hammered in his ears. "This is my wife's grave. Grace Collins. She didn't have any children." The Blue Jacket twins' defiance crumbled. Her lower lip trembled. But our mommy said Mommy Grace would take care of us. She said if anything bad happened, we should find Mommy Grace at the place where her name is written in stone." "We walked for 2 days," the pink coat girl whispered. "We used the map Mommy drew before she went to heaven." Richard's hands shook as he pulled his phone from his pocket, then stopped. Who would he call? What would he even say? Instead, he studied the girls more carefully. They were shivering violently now, their lips tinged blue. Hypothermia, he realized with sudden clarity. They needed warmth, food, medical attention. Questions could wait. "What are your names?" he asked. The protective one hesitated, then answered. "I'm Emma. This is Ella. We're twins." "I can see that," Richard said, managing a small smile that felt foreign on his face. "I'm Richard. This was, my wife's grave. And I think we need to get you somewhere warm and figure out what's going on. Would that be okay?" Ella nodded eagerly, but Emma's eyes narrowed with suspicion. "Are you going to call the police? Send us back to Mr. Henderson's house." "Who's Mr. Henderson?" "Our foster dad." Emma spat the word like poison. "He hit Ella when she cried for mommy. That's why we ran away." Richard felt rage flare in his chest, the same protective fury that used to overwhelm him when Grace would come home from the foundation, shaking with anger over some injustice she'd witnessed. He forced his voice to remain calm. "No police," he promised, though he knew that was likely illegal. "Not yet. First, let's get you warm. Then you can tell me everything about how you knew my wife." He stood, extending both hands. After a moment's hesitation, Ella took his right hand. Emma, still wary, took his left. As they walked toward his car, Richard glanced back at Grace's headstone, the lilies he'd brought lying forgotten on the ground. "Grace," he whispered into the morning air. "What did you do?" The wind carried no answer, only the distant cry of a crow and the crunch of gravel beneath their feet. But as Richard helped the girls into the heated leather seats of his Mercedes, wrapping them in the cashmere throw Grace had kept in the back seat, he felt something shift inside him, a crack in the armor of grief he built around his heart. Emma's small voice broke the silence as he started the engine. "Mr. Richard? Will you really help us?" He met her eyes in the rearview mirror, brown eyes, he noticed now, flecked with gold. Familiar eyes, though he couldn't place why. "Yes," he heard himself say. "I will." As they drove away from the cemetery, Richard Collins had no idea that this promise would unravel everything he thought he knew about his wife, his business, and himself. The twins fell asleep before they reached the main road, their heads leaning against each other, hands still clasped. In the rearview mirror, they looked like two angels who'd fallen to earth. Grace's angels, perhaps. The thought sent chills down his spine that had nothing to do with the December cold. The mansion felt different with children in it. Richard stood in the marble foyer, watching as Ella and Emma gaped at the twin staircases that curved upward like something from a fairy tale. Crystal chandeliers cast prismatic light across walls adorned with art that cost more than most people earned in a lifetime. The girls' reflections multiplied in the gilt-edged mirrors, two small, bedraggled figures who seemed to shrink the grander their surroundings became. "Mrs. Patterson!" Richard called out, his voice echoing through the cavernous space. Within moments, his housekeeper appeared from the direction of the kitchen, wiping her hands on her apron. Margaret Patterson had worked for the Collins family for 15 years, a stern Scottish woman in her mid-60s who ran the household with military precision. She took one look at the twins and her expression shifted from surprise to immediate concern. "Lord have mercy," she breathed, already moving toward them. "Where did you find these poor lambs?" "It's complicated," Richard said, running a hand through his hair. "They were at Grace's grave. They're cold, hungry, and I think they need medical attention. Can you say no more?" Mrs. Patterson was already kneeling before the girls, her weathered hands gentle as she examined their makeshift shoes. "Let's get you upstairs to a proper bath, shall we? And I've got fresh soup on the stove." "We don't want to be trouble," Emma said quietly, though her eyes kept darting toward the kitchen doorway, where the scent of something warm and savory drifted through. "Trouble?" Mrs. Patterson laughed, a sound like wind chimes. "Child, I've been rattling around this empty house for 3 months with nothing but Mr. Collins's burnt toast to fuss over. You're doing me a favor." Ella managed a small smile. Emma remained guarded. "Mrs. Patterson," Richard said carefully. "Did Grace ever mention anything about 2 girls? About helping a woman with twin daughters?" The housekeeper's brow furrowed. "Mrs. Collins helped a great many people through her foundation work. She didn't always share the details with me." "Why do you ask?" "Because these girls claim Grace promised to take care of them." Mrs. Patterson's eyes widened, but she recovered quickly. "Well then. I suppose we'd better honor that promise, hadn't we? Come along, girls. Let's get you cleaned up, and then we'll sort everything out." As the housekeeper led the twins up the right-hand staircase, Ella looked back at Richard. "You won't leave while we're upstairs? You won't disappear?" The question pierced something in Richard's chest. "I'll be right here," he promised. "I'm going to make some phone calls, but I'm not going anywhere." Only when they'd vanished down the second-floor hallway did Richard allow himself to collapse onto the antique bench near the door. His hands were shaking. He pulled out his phone and stared at it, cycling through his contacts. Who could possibly help him make sense of this? Finally, he dialed his lawyer. "Richard." James Whitmore's voice was professionally cheerful. "Bit early for a call, isn't it? Everything all right?" "James, I need to ask you something confidential. If 2 children showed up claiming my deceased wife promised to care for them, what are my legal obligations?" Silence stretched across the line. Then, "Jesus, Richard. Are you serious?" "Completely." "Okay. Okay." Richard could hear James shuffling papers. "First question, are you certain these children aren't a scam?" People prey on grieving widowers, especially wealthy ones. They're 8 years old, James. They were sleeping on my wife's grave wearing plastic bags as shoes. Christ. More shuffling. All right. Legally speaking, you have no obligation to them unless Grace formally designated herself as their guardian, which seems unlikely if you didn't know about them. However, if they're in danger or have been abandoned, you have a duty to report it to Child Protective Services. They ran away from an abusive foster home. Then you definitely need to report it. Richard, I know your heart's in the right place, but you can't just keep random children. They knew her name. They had a map showing how to find her grave. Another pause. What are you not telling me? Richard closed his eyes. I think Grace was helping their mother. I think there's more to this story, and I need to find out what before I make any calls to CPS. Can you give me 24 hours? Richard. Please, James. One day. If Grace made a promise to these girls, I need to understand why before I hand them over to the system. He could hear James's heavy sigh. 24 hours. But Richard, be careful. If this blows up, it could damage your reputation and the company. Not to mention the legal ramifications. I understand. After hanging up, Richard sat in the silence of his too large house and realized he didn't care about the legal ramifications or his reputation. For the first time since Grace's death, he felt something other than the crushing weight of grief. Purpose. Direction. A mystery to solve that connected him to his wife. He stood and walked to Grace's study, a room he'd avoided since her death. Mrs. Patterson had kept it clean but untouched, waiting for Richard to decide what to do with Grace's things. Books lined the walls, covering everything from social justice to child psychology to art history. Her desk sat beneath a window overlooking the gardens she'd loved, its surface still organized with her characteristic precision. Richard opened the desk drawers, unsure what he was looking for. Files from the Grace Collins Foundation, mostly, grant applications, donor lists, expense reports. Nothing about twins. Nothing about a woman with daughters. Then he found it, a leather-bound journal tucked into the bottom drawer, beneath a stack of old greeting cards. His hands trembled as he opened it. Grace's handwriting flowed across the pages, her thoughts, her plans, her private reflections on the work she loved. Richard had never read it before, it felt like trespassing on sacred ground even now. But the girls' faces flashed in his mind, and he began to read. March 3rd, met the most remarkable woman today at the downtown clinic. Clara Bennett, single mother, 2 daughters, fighting stage 4 cancer with more grace than I've seen in people half as burdened. She worked as a data analyst before the diagnosis. Now she can barely afford treatment. The girls, Ella and Emma, sat in the waiting room doing homework while their mother received chemotherapy. When I asked what they wanted to be when they grew up, Ella said, happy, and Emma said, together. It broke my heart. Richard's vision blurred. He flipped forward through the pages. April 15th, arranged for Clara's hospital bills to be covered through the Foundation's emergency fund. Richard would have questions if he knew the amounts involved, but I'll find a way to justify it. She's dying, and those girls will have no one. I can't just stand by. May 22nd, Clara told me about her past today. She used to work for Dane International, Victor's company, before Richard merged with them. She discovered something in the overseas accounts, something that made her a liability. That's why she lost her job, why she couldn't afford insurance when the cancer came. Victor Dane destroyed her life to protect his secrets. Richard stopped reading, ice flooding his veins. Victor Dane, his business partner, his college roommate, the man who'd stood beside him at Grace's funeral and delivered a eulogy about her kindness. June 8, I'm in over my head. Clara has documents proving Victor's been laundering money through international aid contracts. She kept copies before they fired her, insurance against retaliation. But now she's dying, and she's terrified of what will happen to her girls if the truth comes out. I promised her I'd protect them. I don't know how, but I will. July 1st, I did something terrible today. I forged Richard's signature to transfer money to a safe account for Clara's daughters. Not foundation money, our personal funds. But I couldn't ask Richard's permission. He trusts Victor implicitly, and he'd never believe his partner capable of such corruption. I'm protecting my husband from a truth that would destroy him. The journal slipped from Richard's hands, landing on the desk with a soft thud. Grace had known. She'd known about Victor's corruption and never told him. She'd been protecting Clara Bennett's children with his money, forging his signature, keeping secrets in the marriage he believed was built on absolute trust. Mr. Collins. Mrs. Patterson's voice called from the doorway. The girls are asking for you. Richard looked up, his face numb. I'll be right there. Are you all right, sir? You look like you've seen a ghost. Maybe I have, he whispered. Upstairs, he found Ella and Emma transformed. They sat at the edge of one of the guest beds, clean and dressed in what must have been Mrs. Patterson's improvised clothing, oversized sweaters and soft pants rolled up at the ankles. Their hair had been combed and braided. Without the layers of grime, Richard could see their faces clearly for the first time. His heart stopped. The shape of their eyes. The curve of their cheekbones. The way Emma tilted her chin when she looked at him, defiant and proud. They looked like Grace. Not identical, but the resemblance was unmistakable now that he could see them properly. Clara Bennett must have shared some features with his wife, or perhaps it was simply the power of suggestion, his grief-stricken mind finding Grace's face everywhere he looked. You came back, Ella said, relief evident in her voice. I promised I would. Richard sat in the chair Mrs. Patterson had placed beside the bed. I found something of my wife's. A journal where she wrote about your mother. About Clara. Both girls' faces crumpled. Emma grabbed her sister's hand. You knew our mommy? Ella whispered. No. I never met her. But Grace did. She helped your mother when she was sick. Mommy said Mommy Grace was an angel, Emma said quietly. She said angels don't have wings, they just have bigger hearts than other people. Richard swallowed hard against the lump in his throat. Your mother was right. Grace had the biggest heart I've ever known. Then why didn't she save our mommy? Ella's question was plaintive, heartbreaking in its innocence. Sometimes, Richard said carefully, people get sick in ways that even the best doctors can't fix. But Grace tried. She made sure your mother got treatment, that you had a place to live. She cared about you very much. Did she tell you about us? Emma asked. The question hung in the air like smoke. Richard considered lying, but these girls had been lied to enough, by foster parents, by a system that had failed them, perhaps even by their own mother's desperate promises. No, he admitted. She kept you secret. I think she was trying to protect you from something dangerous. But I'm going to find out what, and I'm going to make sure you're safe. That's a promise. Mrs. Patterson appeared with a tray of soup and fresh bread. As the girls ate hungrily, manners forgotten, survival instincts taking over, Richard watched them and felt the weight of Grace's unspoken legacy settling onto his shoulders. His phone buzzed. A text from Victor Dane, board meeting tomorrow, 9 a.m. Need to discuss Grace's foundation discrepancies. Time to clean house. Richard's jaw clenched. He typed back, I'll be there. But as he watched Ella and Emma, Grace's secret angels, he made a silent vow. Whatever Victor had done, whatever corruption Grace had discovered, whatever secrets had cost Clara Bennett her life and left these children orphaned, he would uncover it all. And he would make sure Grace's promise was kept. Even if it meant destroying everything he'd built. The Grace Collins Foundation occupied the top 3 floors of a glass tower in downtown Manhattan, overlooking Central Park. Richard had purchased the building 5 years ago as an anniversary gift. Grace had laughed and called it excessive, then promptly turned it into a headquarters for changing the world. Now, standing in the elevator as it climbed toward the executive floor, Richard felt like a stranger in a building he owned. How many times had Grace ridden this same elevator, carrying secrets he'd never suspected? How many of these polished surfaces had reflected a woman he thought he knew completely? The doors opened to reveal Monica Foster, the foundation's executive director, waiting in the lobby. She was a striking woman in her 40s with close-cropped natural hair and the kind of professional warmth that put donors at ease while extracting maximum contributions. Richard. She embraced him briefly. I'm so glad you're finally coming to see Grace's work. She would have wanted you to understand what she built here. Would she? The question came out harder than intended. Monica's smile faltered. Of course. She was so proud of. Monica, I need to see every file related to Clara Bennett. The color drained from Monica's face. How do you know that name? Her daughters were sleeping on my wife's grave yesterday morning. Richard stepped closer, voice low and intense. They ran away from foster care because Grace promised to protect them. So I'll ask again, show me every file related to Clara Bennett. Monica glanced around the empty lobby, then gestured toward Grace's private office. We should talk in there. The office was exactly as Grace had left it. Photos lined the walls, children at schools the foundation had built in Guatemala, women at a clinic in Kenya, families receiving keys to new homes in Detroit. Grace smiled from every frame, radiant with purpose. Monica closed the door and turned to face Richard, her professional composure cracking. Clara Bennett doesn't exist in our official records. Excuse me. Grace paid for everything out of pocket. Hospital bills, housing, living expenses. She never ran it through the foundation because. Monica hesitated. Because Clara used to work for Dane International. Grace was afraid if your company found out, if Victor found out, there would be questions. Complications. Richard's hands clenched into fists. Victor knew about Clara? No. At least, Grace didn't think so. But Clara had information about illegal activities at Dane International, money laundering through overseas charity contracts. When she tried to report it internally, they fired her. Destroyed her reputation. Made sure she'd never work in finance again. Monica's voice shook. 6 months later, Clara was diagnosed with cancer. No job, no insurance, 2 young daughters. Grace found her at a free clinic and couldn't walk away. How much did Grace spend? Over the last year? Close to $400,000. Medical bills, rent, food, legal fees to fight the wrongful termination. Grace liquidated some of her personal stocks, used her inheritance from her grandmother. She never touched your shared accounts because she knew you'd ask questions. Richard sank into Grace's desk chair, the leather still holding a faint trace of her perfume. Victor scheduled a board meeting this morning. He mentioned foundation discrepancies. Monica's face went pale. Oh God! Richard, there are discrepancies. Grace had to adjust some numbers to cover her tracks. She borrowed from the administrative budget, always intending to pay it back, but she died before she could. The auditors found it 3 weeks ago. $60,000 that can't be accounted for through normal channels. Victor's been pushing for a full investigation. He wants to freeze the foundation's assets until everything's resolved. If the press gets wind that Grace Collins misappropriated charity funds. She didn't misappropriate anything, Richard cut in sharply. She saved a dying woman and her children. Try explaining that to the board. Or the IRS. Monica crossed her arms. Richard, I loved Grace like a sister, but what she did was technically fraud. If Victor pushes this, it could destroy her reputation and shut down the foundation permanently. Everything she built, the schools, the clinics, the housing projects, all of it could be dismantled. Richard stood and walked to the window, looking out at the park where Grace used to jog every morning. He could almost see her down there, ponytail bouncing, always stopping to pet every dog and smile at every child. Where's Clara's evidence? He asked quietly. The documents proving Victor's crimes. Grace locked them in her safe deposit box. She said if anything happened to her, someone would know what to do with them. Someone? Monica met his eyes. She said you would know. When the time was right. A knock at the door interrupted them. Victor Dane entered without waiting for an answer, his silver hair perfectly styled, his suit custom tailored to his athletic frame. He'd been Richard's roommate at Harvard, his best man at the wedding, his partner in building Collins Industries into a Fortune 500 company. He was also, Richard now understood, a liar and a criminal. Richard. Good to see you back in the saddle. Victor's smile was all teeth. Monica, if you'll excuse us. Board meeting starts in 10 minutes. Actually, Richard said, Monica should stay. This concerns the foundation. Victor's smile dimmed slightly. Richard, I know you're still grieving, but we need to discuss Grace's irregularities. Privately. No. Richard's voice carried the weight of decades building an empire. Whatever you have to say about my wife, you can say in front of the woman who helped her change thousands of lives. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Victor's eyes narrowed, calculating. Very well, he said smoothly. But I don't think you'll like what the auditors found. Richard thought of 2 little girls eating soup in his kitchen, their plastic bag shoes drying by the fireplace. He thought of Grace's journal, her confession, her desperate attempts to protect the innocent from men like Victor Dane. Try me, Richard said. And somewhere in the building's ventilation system, a ghost seemed to whisper, finally. The boardroom was all sharp angles and cold glass, a space designed for making ruthless decisions with clinical efficiency. 12 chairs surrounded a table of polished black marble that reflected the faces of the people seated around it like a dark mirror. Richard recognized most of them, major donors, corporate attorneys, finance executives who'd agreed to serve on the foundation's board as much for the tax benefits as the charitable mission. Victor stood at the head of the table, a presentation already loaded on the massive screen behind him. He'd positioned himself in Grace's usual spot, Richard noticed. The symbolism wasn't subtle. Gentlemen, ladies, Victor began, his voice carrying practiced authority. Thank you for convening on short notice. As you know, Our recent audit has uncovered some troubling financial irregularities within the Grace Collins Foundation. Richard took his seat at the opposite end of the table, Monica beside him. He caught her worried glance and gave a slight nod. "Trust me," it said. Though he wasn't entirely sure he trusted himself. Victor clicked to the first slide, a spreadsheet with several entries highlighted in red. Over the past 18 months, approximately $60,000 has been transferred from the Foundation's administrative accounts to an unknown recipient. The transactions were authorized with Grace's credentials, but there's no documentation, no grant application, no paper trail of any kind. Murmurs rippled around the table. Margaret Chen, a retired federal judge who'd been one of Grace's earliest supporters, frowned deeply. That doesn't sound like Grace. She was meticulous about documentation. Which is precisely why this is so concerning, Victor said smoothly. Either someone was using her credentials fraudulently, or... He paused, letting the implication hang in the air. Or what? Richard's voice cut through the room like a blade. Victor met his eyes with what might have been sympathy, if Richard hadn't just learned what the man was capable of. Or Grace herself was diverting funds for personal use. Richard, I know that's difficult to hear. Then don't say it. Richard stood, his 6'2" frame commanding attention. You want to accuse my wife of theft? Then have the courage to say it directly instead of dancing around implications. The room went silent. Victor's jaw tightened. I'm trying to be respectful of your grief. My grief is none of your concern. Grace's reputation is. Richard walked to the screen, studying the spreadsheet. Monica, did Grace ever discuss emergency discretionary funds with the board? Monica straightened in her chair. Yes. 2 years ago, Grace proposed a protocol for urgent cases that fell outside normal grant cycles. Situations where immediate intervention could save lives. And the board approved this? Richard addressed the room. Judge Chen nodded. We authorized up to $75,000 annually for Grace's discretionary use, provided she submitted retroactive documentation within 6 months. There you have it, Richard said, turning to Victor. Grace was operating within board-approved parameters. Except she never submitted the documentation, Victor countered, clicking to another slide, this one showing email timestamps. The 6-month deadline passed 3 weeks before her death. She knew she was in violation but did nothing to correct it. Maybe because she was being harassed by fraudulent audits. Richard kept his voice level, but fury simmered beneath the surface. When did you order this investigation, Victor? When the Foundation's accountant flagged the discrepancies. When exactly? Victor's pause was barely perceptible. 4 months ago. So 2 months before Grace died, you were already investigating her. Richard let that sink in. And you never mentioned this to me. Your business partner. Your best friend. Why? I didn't want to worry you with Foundation business when you had the merger to focus on. Bullshit. The profanity shocked the room. Richard never cursed in business settings. Grace had always handled conflict with grace, and he'd learned from her example. But Grace wasn't here anymore, and her enemies were circling her legacy like vultures. Victor's composure finally cracked. Careful, Richard. Or what? You'll accuse me of embezzlement too? Richard planted his hands on the table, leaning forward. Let me tell you what I think happened. I think Grace discovered something that made her a liability. I think she used Foundation resources to protect someone who had information that could destroy you. The color drained from Victor's face. That's absurd. Is it? Because I found Grace's journal. I know about Clara Bennett. The name landed like a grenade in the center of the table. Victor went perfectly still, the calculating gleam in his eyes replaced by something harder, more dangerous. I don't know what you're talking about, he said carefully. Clara Bennett. Former data analyst at Dane International. Discovered your money laundering operation. You fired her, blacklisted her, destroyed her career. Then Grace found her dying of cancer with 2 young daughters and no way to pay for treatment. Richard's voice rose with each sentence. Grace spent her own money, not foundation funds, her own inheritance, to save Clara's life and protect those children from you. Richard, you're clearly upset, Judge Chen began. I'm upset that we're in a room discussing whether my wife was a thief when the real criminal is standing at the head of this table. Richard pointed at Victor. The $60,000 Grace misappropriated. That was Clara's living expenses in her final months. Grace borrowed it from the administrative budget intending to pay it back from her next stock dividend. She died before she could. Victor's laugh was cold. You have no proof of any of this. You're grieving, and you've concocted a conspiracy theory to avoid facing the fact that Grace wasn't perfect. I have her journal. I have Clara's daughters, who are currently safe in my home. And I have Clara's evidence. Richard pulled out his phone, snapping a photo of the boardroom. In fact, I'm heading to Grace's safe deposit box after this meeting to retrieve the documents Clara gave her, documents proving you've been laundering money through fake international aid contracts for the past 3 years. The bluff was enormous. Richard had no idea if such documents actually existed or if Grace's safe deposit box contained anything beyond jewelry and legal papers. But the way Victor's face went white told him everything he needed to know. You're bluffing, Victor said, but his voice wavered. Am I? Richard smiled coldly. There's one way to find out. We can continue this audit, investigate every penny Grace spent, drag her name through the press. Or you can withdraw your accusations, resign from this board, and hope I don't decide to hand Clara's evidence to the FBI. The silence stretched taut as a wire. Finally, Judge Chen spoke. Victor, I think you should step outside while the board discusses this matter privately. Margaret, you can't seriously believe. Out. Now. Victor's hands clenched into fists, but he had no choice. As he stalked toward the door, he paused beside Richard. This isn't over, he whispered. You're right, Richard replied quietly. It's just beginning. When the door closed behind Victor, Richard's knees nearly buckled. He'd just declared war on his oldest friend, his business partner, based on a dead woman's journal and the word of 2 traumatized children. But as Judge Chen began asking careful questions about Clara Bennett, Richard realized something. For the first time since Grace's death, he felt alive. The bank vault was colder than Richard remembered, all sterile fluorescent lights and rows of metal boxes stretching into shadows. He'd been here only once before, when he and Grace had opened their joint safe deposit box shortly after their wedding. Grace had laughed at his insistence on storing their marriage certificate and her grandmother's pearls in a vault. You can't protect everything by locking it away, she'd said, kissing his cheek. Some things need to breathe. Now, following the bank manager down the narrow corridor, Richard wondered what other secrets Grace had locked away in the darkness. Here we are, Mr. Collins. Box 347. The manager, a thin man with wire-rimmed glasses, inserted his master key, then stepped back. Take all the time you need. Ring the bell when you're finished. Richard waited until the man's footsteps faded before inserting Grace's key, the one he'd found in her jewelry box that morning, attached to a small tag with only a number written in her elegant handwriting. His hands shook as he turned it. The box slid out smoothly, heavier than expected. He carried it to the private viewing room and sat down, staring at the brushed metal surface as if it might contain a bomb. In a way, it did. He lifted the lid. On top lay a sealed envelope with his name written across it in Grace's handwriting. Beneath that, a stack of manila folders bound with string. A USB drive. A smaller jewelry box. And at the bottom, a framed photograph he'd never seen before, Grace, radiant and smiling, her arms around two little girls with dark honey hair. Ella and Emma. They couldn't have been more than 5 years old in the photo, their faces bright with joy as they clutched Grace's hands. Behind them, a woman who must have been Clara Bennett, beautiful despite the illness already hollowing her cheeks, her eyes filled with gratitude as she watched Grace embrace her daughters. Richard's vision blurred. He set the photo aside carefully and picked up the envelope. His fingers fumbled with the seal. Inside, several pages in Grace's handwriting, dated 2 weeks before her death. My dearest Richard. If you're reading this, then I'm gone, and somehow Clara's daughters found you. I'd like to think it means my faith in you wasn't misplaced, that despite everything, you chose to look deeper instead of looking away. I need to tell you about Clara, about the girls, about choices I made that broke our marriage vows even as they honored what I thought those vows meant. I met Clara 18 months ago at a free clinic where I was volunteering. She was dying, Richard. Stage 4 cancer, no insurance, no family except 2 beautiful daughters who would become orphans within a year. I could have written a check, made arrangements through the foundation, and walked away feeling good about myself. But then Clara told me why she had no insurance. Why she'd lost her job. Why she was terrified to even tell me her real name. She used to work for Victor. I know you trust him. You've known him since Harvard, built your company together, stood beside him through his divorce and his father's death. He's been a brother to you. But Richard, he's not who you think he is. Clara was a data analyst in Dane International's overseas division. She discovered that Victor was creating fake aid contracts, fictional schools in Kenya, non-existent clinics in Guatemala, fabricated infrastructure projects in the Philippines. Real charities would apply for funding, but Victor would inflate the costs by 50%, sometimes more. The excess money was laundered through shell companies and funneled back to his personal accounts. Millions of dollars, Richard. Millions that were supposed to help the poorest people on earth. When Clara tried to report it through proper channels, Victor fired her. He blacklisted her in the industry, destroyed her references, made sure she'd never work in finance again. Then he had his lawyers threaten her with lawsuits for breach of confidentiality if she ever went public. She was drowning in legal fees when the cancer diagnosis came. By the time I met her, she'd given up fighting. She just wanted to survive long enough to see her daughters settled somewhere safe. I couldn't let that stand. I couldn't let Victor destroy an innocent woman and orphan 2 children just to protect his corruption. So I helped her, Richard. I paid her medical bills, her rent, her lawyer fees. I used my inheritance, my stock dividends, everything I had that didn't require your signature. Except it wasn't enough. The cancer was aggressive, the treatment expensive. I ran through my funds in 6 months. That's when I did something unforgivable. I borrowed $60,000 from the foundation's administrative budget. I told myself I'd pay it back from the next dividend check. I told myself it was justified, that saving 2 children's mother was more important than maintaining perfect books. I told myself a lot of things to excuse what I knew was wrong. Then Victor started the audit. Richard stopped reading, his heart pounding. He looked up at the ceiling, trying to breathe through the crushing weight on his chest. I don't know if he suspected I knew about Clara, or if it was just coincidence. But 4 months ago, he started investigating the foundation's finances. He knew he'd find the missing money eventually. He knew it would destroy my reputation, shut down the foundation, maybe even result in criminal charges. I was trapped, Richard. If I came forward with Clara's evidence, Victor would bury us both in lawsuits. If I stayed silent, he'd expose me as a thief and destroy everything I'd built. Either way, Clara's daughters would end up in the system, forgotten and alone. So I made arrangements. I moved Clara and the girls 3 times in 6 months, always covering my tracks. I gave Clara a map to my grave, told her to give it to Ella and Emma with instructions to find Mommy Grace's resting place, if anything happened to her. I knew it was a long shot, that 2 children could never navigate the world alone. But I couldn't think of any other way to lead them to you. Because you, Richard, are the only person I trust completely. You're the only one with the power and resources to protect them. Richard's hands shook so badly he almost dropped the pages. He forced himself to keep reading. I know what you're thinking. That I should have told you. That we could have faced this together. But Richard, you loved Victor like a brother. You would have demanded proof, confronted him, given him a chance to explain. And Victor is brilliant at explaining things away. He would have convinced you Clara was lying, that I was being emotional and irrational. You might have even believed him over me. I couldn't risk that. Not with 2 children's lives at stake. The folders in this box contain everything Clara saved, contracts, emails, bank transfers, testimony from other employees who were too afraid to come forward. It's enough to bury Victor and bring down Dane International. But it will also destroy Collins Industries, Richard. The merger tied your companies together. His corruption will taint everything you've built. That's why I never used it. That's why I kept running, hiding, trying to buy enough time for Clara to survive and for me to find another way. But time ran out, didn't it? For Clara. For me. Maybe for everyone. Now the choice is yours. You can use this evidence to expose Victor and save the foundation, but lose your company. Or you can bury it, protect your empire, and send Ella and Emma back into the system that's already failed them once. I won't tell you what to do, Richard. You're the only person who can make this choice. I will tell you this, I've never regretted loving you. I've never regretted our life together. But I have regretted not being brave enough to tell you the truth while I was alive. The girls, Ella and Emma, they're special, Richard. They're brilliant and kind and so full of hope despite everything they've endured. When I was with them, I could imagine what our children might have been like. What our family might have become. Please don't let them grow up alone. Please don't let Victor win. And please, my love, forgive me for keeping secrets. I was trying to protect you. I was trying to be strong enough for both of us. I hope I was right about you. I hope you're reading this because you chose love over empire. Forever yours, Grace. P.S. The small jewelry box contains something I bought the week before I died. I was going to give it to you on our anniversary. Open it when you're ready. Richard sat motionless, tears streaming down his face. Around him, the vault seemed to shrink and expand simultaneously, reality bending under the weight of his wife's confession. She'd known she was in danger. She'd known Victor was closing in. And she died never telling Richard the truth, believing, perhaps rightly, that he would have chosen his business partner over her word. What would you have done if your spouse kept a secret this big to protect someone innocent? Would you forgive them, or would the betrayal be too deep? Let us know in the comments. With shaking hands, Richard opened the small jewelry box. Inside, nestled in black velvet, were two delicate silver necklaces. Each held a pendant, a tiny engraved heart. He lifted them carefully and saw inscriptions on the backs. The first, Ella. The second, Emma. Grace had bought them gifts. She'd been planning for a future where somehow, impossibly, these children would become part of their family. Richard closed his fist around the necklaces and stood. He gathered the folders, the USB drive, the photograph. Then he rang the bell for the bank manager. He had a choice to make. Empire or innocence. Reputation or redemption. But as he thought of two little girls asleep in his guest room, calling him Mr. Richard, with voices that still trembled with fear, he realized Grace had already made the choice for him. She'd taught him how. Now he just had to be brave enough to follow through. Richard returned home to find chaos in his usually pristine kitchen. Flour dusted every surface like fresh snow. Chocolate chips scattered across the marble countertop formed a trail leading to where Ella stood on a step stool, wooden spoon in hand, her face smudged with batter. Emma sat at the kitchen island, methodically reading from a cookbook propped against a fruit bowl, her expression serious with concentration. Mrs. Patterson supervised from the doorway, a rare smile softening her stern features. "We're making cookies," Ella announced proudly when she spotted Richard. Mrs. Patterson said Mommy Grace used to make them every Sunday. Richard's throat tightened. He'd forgotten about Grace's Sunday baking ritual, how she'd fill the house with the scent of vanilla and chocolate, leaving cookies for him to find throughout the week. Little reminders that she was thinking of him even when work pulled them in different directions. "Chocolate chip?" he asked, setting down his briefcase. "With extra chips," Emma confirmed. "The recipe says 1 cup, but we used 2. More is better, right?" Grace would have agreed with that philosophy, Richard said, and the girls beamed. He watched them work together with the seamless coordination unique to twins, Emma reading instructions, Ella executing them, both anticipating each other's movements without speaking. They'd survived things no 8-year-old should endure, yet here they were, finding joy in a kitchen covered in flour, creating something sweet from simple ingredients. Grace's legacy, he thought. Not just in grand foundations and international charity work, but in these small moments of rescued innocence. "Mr. Collins," Mrs. Patterson said quietly, drawing him aside. "There've been 3 calls from Mr. Dane's office. He's quite insistent about speaking with you." "I'm sure he is." There was also a Detective Sarah Morrison from the NYPD. She said it's regarding 2 missing children from a foster home in Brooklyn. Mrs. Patterson's eyes flicked toward Ella and Emma. "I told her you'd return her call." Richard's jaw clenched. He'd known this was coming, the system wouldn't let 2 foster children disappear without investigation. But he'd hoped for more time. "I'll handle it," he said. "In the meantime, keep the girls inside. No one enters this house without my permission." "Understood." Mrs. Patterson nodded, understanding the gravity in his tone. She'd worked for the Collins family long enough to recognize when her employer was preparing for battle. Richard retreated to his study and called James Whitmore first. "Please tell me you didn't kidnap those children," were James's opening words. "They're not kidnapped. They came to me." "Richard, the law doesn't recognize nuance when it comes to missing minors. If you don't report them immediately, you're looking at custodial interference charges, possibly. What if I want to become their guardian? Silence on the other end. Then, you can't be serious. Grace wanted this. I found a letter, James. She made arrangements for these girls before she died. A letter isn't a legal document. Without formal guardianship papers or foster certification, you have no claim to them. James's voice gentled. Richard, I know you're grieving, but you can't save these children. Call CPS, let them handle the placement. Their foster father was abusive. Then CPS will investigate and find them a better home. Or they'll fall through the cracks like thousands of other kids. Richard's grip tightened on the phone. Grace spent her last year protecting them from that fate. I won't dishonor her memory by feeding them back into a broken system. Then let me start emergency guardianship proceedings. It'll take time, there'll be home studies and background checks, but if you're serious about this. How much time? Weeks. Maybe months. I don't have months. Victor's already making moves. Richard glanced at the folders from Grace's safe deposit box, spread across his desk like evidence at a crime scene. He knows I have something on him, and he'll use every weapon at his disposal. Including these girls. What are you talking about? Richard explained quickly, Clara Bennett, the money laundering, Grace's investigation, the evidence now in his possession. With each revelation, James's breathing grew more labored. Jesus Christ, Richard. You're saying Victor Dane has been running a multi-million-dollar fraud operation through fake charity contracts? For at least 3 years. Probably longer. And Grace knew about this? Why didn't she go to the authorities? Because it would have destroyed Collins Industries. The merger tied our companies together, Victor's crimes become our liability. Richard rubbed his eyes, exhaustion finally catching up with him. She was protecting me, James. Protecting our empire. Even while Victor was investigating her for the money she spent saving Clara's life. This is. James trailed off. This is potentially criminal conspiracy, Richard. If you knew about Victor's activities and did nothing. I didn't know until yesterday. But Grace did. And she was your wife, your business partner in the foundation. Prosecutors could argue you should have known, or that she was acting with your implicit approval. The implications settled over Richard like a shroud. Grace's attempt to protect him might have done the opposite, made him complicit in Victor's crimes through willful ignorance. So what do I do? Richard asked quietly. You go to the FBI. Today. You turn over every piece of evidence Grace collected, you cooperate fully with their investigation, and you pray they believe you had no knowledge of Victor's activities. And the girls? You call Detective Morrison and explain the situation. If Grace's evidence is as solid as you say, the authorities will understand why these children needed protection. It might even work in your favor for the guardianship petition. Richard closed his eyes, seeing Ella's hopeful smile as she stirred cookie batter, Emma's careful concentration as she measured ingredients. They'd already lost their mother. Already survived abuse and abandonment. How could he put them through interrogations and investigations, force them to relive trauma in sterile police interview rooms? There has to be another way, he said. There isn't. Not if you want to do this legally. After hanging up, Richard sat in silence, Grace's letter resting on the desk before him. Please don't let them grow up alone, she'd written. Please don't let Victor win. But how could he honor both requests when they seemed fundamentally opposed? Exposing Victor meant exposing the girls to scrutiny, dragging them through legal proceedings that would terrify them. Protecting the girls meant letting Victor's crimes continue, letting Grace's evidence gather dust while more people suffered. A knock at the door interrupted his spiral. Emma peeked in, her hands still dusted with flour. "The cookies are ready," she said. "Mrs. Patterson said you should come try them while they're warm." Richard followed her to the kitchen, where a plate of misshapen but fragrant cookies waited on the counter. Ella handed him one proudly. "We made extra for you to take to work tomorrow," she said. "So you'll remember us during the day." The simple gesture broke something in Richard's chest. These children, who'd been given every reason to distrust adults, to expect abandonment and betrayal, were already trying to take care of him. He bit into the cookie. It was too sweet, the chocolate chips overwhelming the dough, exactly the way Grace used to make them. "Perfect," he said, his voice rough. Ella's face lit up. Emma's shoulders relaxed slightly, though wariness never fully left her eyes. She was the protector, Richard realized. The one who'd kept her sister safe through foster care, through their mother's death, through 2 days walking to a cemetery based on a dying woman's directions. She reminded him of Grace. "Girls," Richard said, crouching to their level. "I need to ask you something important. Do you remember anything about where you lived with your mother? Before she got sick?" Emma's expression shuddered immediately. "Why?" "Because I'm trying to help. But I need to understand everything that happened. Are you going to send us away?" Ella's voice was small, frightened. "No." Richard met both their eyes. "I promise you, I will never send you away. But there are people, police, social workers, who are looking for you. They don't understand that you came to me for help. They think you're in danger." "We were in danger," Emma said fiercely. Mr. Henderson hit Ella. He locked her in the basement when she cried. Richard's hands clenched. "Did you report this to anyone? Who would believe us? We're just kids." Emma's cynicism was heartbreaking. "Everyone believes adults." "I believe you," Richard said. "And I'm going to make sure you're never sent back there. But to do that, I need to talk to the police. I need to tell them about your mother, about Grace, about why you're here. Will they take us away from you?" Ella whispered. Richard wanted to lie, to promise everything would be fine. But these girls had been lied to enough. "They might try," he admitted. "But I'm going to fight for you. I'm going to do everything in my power to keep you safe." That's what Grace would have wanted. Emma studied him for a long moment, her old soul eyes searching his face for deception. Finally, she nodded. "Our mommy said Mommy Grace married a good man. She said if we ever found you, we should trust you even if it was scary." Emma's hand found her sister's. "So we'll trust you." The weight of that trust settled on Richard's shoulders like a physical burden. These children were betting their futures on a man they'd known for less than 48 hours, simply because a dead woman had faith in him. He couldn't let them down. He couldn't let Grace down. Even if it meant destroying everything else. "Thank you," he said quietly. "Now, how about we eat these excellent cookies and watch a movie? Tomorrow will come soon enough." As they settled into the screening room, the girls nestled on either side of him on the leather couch, their heads drooping onto his shoulders as exhaustion finally claimed them. Richard made his decision. He would call Detective Morrison in the morning. He would turn over Grace's evidence to the FBI. He would cooperate fully with every investigation, answer every question, accept whatever consequences came. But he would also fight with every resource at his disposal to protect these children. He would hire the best family lawyers in New York. He would expose Victor's crimes not just to save Grace's reputation, but to prove these girls needed protecting from powerful men who destroyed innocent lives without remorse. And if the system still tried to take Ella and Emma away, then Richard would learn just how far a man could bend the law without breaking it entirely. Grace had taught him compassion. Now he would teach himself ruthlessness in its defense. Detective Sarah Morrison arrived at precisely 8 o'clock the next morning, accompanied by a woman who introduced herself as Linda Chen from Child Protective Services. Richard met them in the formal living room, a space Grace had insisted on decorating despite his protests that they'd never use it. Now he was grateful for the intimidating oil paintings and antique furniture that established a certain gravitas. Mr. Collins, Detective Morrison was a compact woman in her 40s with sharp eyes and graying hair pulled into a tight bun. "Thank you for agreeing to meet with us. I should have called you myself yesterday," Richard admitted. "The situation is complicated. 2 children missing from foster care usually is." Morrison settled into a chair, her posture relaxed but alert. "Why don't you start from the beginning?" Richard told them everything, finding the girls at Grace's grave, the journal, Clara Bennett's story, the connection to his wife's foundation. He left out only the details about Victor's crimes, that evidence was already on its way to the FBI via James Whitmore. When he finished, Linda Chen's expression had shifted from suspicion to something closer to sympathy. "Mr. Collins, I understand your wife had good intentions, but she should have contacted CPS when she learned about Clara Bennett's situation. We could have helped. Could you?" Richard's tone was sharper than intended. Clara had already been through the system. She'd applied for emergency assistance and been denied. Your agency told a dying woman with 2 children that she didn't qualify because she'd been employed within the previous 6 months. Never mind that she'd lost that job due to illegal retaliation. Linda flushed. "The system isn't perfect." "The system failed them," Richard interrupted. "Grace saw that failure and tried to fix it. Now you're here to drag those children back into the same broken mechanism that couldn't help their mother." "We're here," Detective Morrison said firmly, "because those children are legally wards of the state. Whatever your wife's intentions, whatever arrangements she made, they don't supersede the law. Even if the foster home they were placed in was abusive." Morrison's eyes narrowed. "That's a serious allegation. Do you have proof? Ask Ella about the bruises on her ribs. Ask Emma why she stopped speaking for 3 weeks while in Kenneth Henderson's care." Richard leaned forward. "Or better yet, investigate Henderson yourself. I'm willing to bet my girls aren't the first ones who've run away from his home." "Your girls?" Linda Chen's eyebrows rose. Richard met her gaze steadily. "I'm filing for emergency guardianship. James Whitmore is preparing the paperwork now." "Mr. Collins, the process doesn't work that way. There are home studies, background checks, psychological evaluations. Then start them. Today." Richard stood and walked to his desk, retrieving a folder. "This is a preliminary application my attorney prepared. You'll find financial statements proving I can provide for the children, character references from community leaders, medical records showing I'm in good health. Whatever you need, I'll provide." Detective Morrison exchanged a glance with Linda Chen. "Mr. Collins, I appreciate your dedication, but you've known these children for less than 48 hours. Most guardianship cases involve family members or long-term foster parents who've built relationships over months or years. Most guardianship cases don't involve children whose dying mother entrusted them to someone's care with her last breath. We only have your word that happened. Then talk to the nurses at Memorial Hospital where Clara Bennett died. Talk to Monica Foster at the Grace Collins Foundation. Talk to anyone who knew my wife and they'll tell you, Grace didn't make empty promises. Linda Chen sighed, closing her notebook. I'll need to speak with the children. Separately and with you present, as they're not yet comfortable with us. Of course. And Mr. Collins? Morrison stood, her expression softening slightly. I believe you're trying to do the right thing. But these girls have been traumatized. They've lost their mother, suffered abuse, and are now attached to a stranger because he represents their last connection to someone who showed them kindness. That's not a foundation for permanent placement, that's a trauma response. The words hit harder than Richard expected because they contained truth. How much of Ella and Emma's trust in him was genuine, and how much was simply desperate children clinging to any lifeline? Then help me give them time to heal, Richard said quietly. Don't tear them away from the one stable place they've found. Before Morrison could respond, Mrs. Patterson appeared in the doorway, her face pale. Mr. Collins, you need to see the news. Richard followed her to the study where a television displayed a CNN breaking news banner, Collins Industries under investigation for charity fraud. His stomach dropped as the anchor's voice filled the room. Federal investigators have opened a probe into Collins Industries following allegations that the company's charitable foundation, headed by the late Grace Collins, was used to launder money through fake overseas development projects. Sources say the investigation centers on contracts worth millions of dollars that may have been fraudulently awarded to shell companies. No, Richard breathed. No, that's not. His phone erupted with calls. The board. Investors. Media outlets. He ignored them all, his mind racing. Someone had leaked Grace's investigation, but twisted it, made it look like she was the criminal instead of the whistleblower. Victor. It had to be Victor, getting ahead of the story before Richard could expose him. Detective Morrison was watching the television with renewed interest. Mr. Collins, is this related to the children's mother? To Clara Bennett? Richard's jaw clenched. He'd planned to control the narrative, work with the FBI to ensure the truth came out properly. But Victor had forced his hand. Yes, he said. Clara Bennett discovered financial fraud at Dane International, my business partner Victor Dane's company. When she tried to report it, he destroyed her career and her life. My wife spent her last year protecting Clara's daughters from Victor's retaliation. The charity fraud they're reporting. That was Grace using her own money to save a dying woman and her children. Morrison's expression shifted from skepticism to sharp attention. And you have proof of this? I turned over everything to the FBI this morning. Contracts, emails, financial records. Grace documented everything. Then why is CNN reporting that your wife was the criminal? Because Victor Dane is powerful, connected, and desperate. He's trying to destroy Grace's reputation before the truth can come out. Richard's hands shook with fury. He killed Clara Bennett as surely as the cancer did. He orphaned those children. And now he's trying to make my wife look like a thief to cover his own crimes. Linda Chen stood abruptly. I need to make some calls. If what you're saying is true, if these children's mother was targeted by someone with your partner's resources, then their safety might be at risk. That's why they need to stay here, Richard said. With me. Where I can protect them. Morrison pulled out her phone. I'm calling my lieutenant. If this is part of an active federal investigation, we need to coordinate. She looked at Richard, her skepticism replaced by grudging respect. Don't let those girls out of your sight. If Dane is as dangerous as you say, he might see them as loose ends. The word sent ice through Richard's veins. He'd been so focused on legal battles and custody fights that he hadn't considered physical danger. But of course Victor would see the girls as threats, they were living proof of his crimes against Clara. Richard took the stairs two at a time, reaching the guest room where Ella and Emma were reading books Mrs. Patterson had found in the attic. They looked up as he entered, their expressions immediately worried. "What's wrong?" Emma asked, her protective instincts kicking in. Richard forced himself to breathe, to project calm. "Nothing's wrong. But I need you both to stay in the house today. Don't go outside, even into the garden. Can you do that for me? Are we in trouble?" Ella's voice trembled. "No, sweetheart. But there are people who might not want me to help you. People who might try to scare us." He knelt before them. "I won't let anyone hurt you. I promise. But I need you to be very brave and very careful." Emma's jaw set with that fierce determination Richard had come to recognize. "Is it because of what our mommy knew? About the bad things that man did? You know about that?" "Mommy told us," Ella said quietly. "She said bad men hurt good people sometimes, and that's why we had to stay hidden. She said Mommy Grace was keeping us safe. And now I'm going to keep you safe," Richard promised. "But that means following the rules. Stay inside. Stay with Mrs. Patterson. If anyone comes to the house that you don't recognize, you hide in the safe room I'm going to show you." "Like a castle?" Ella asked. "Exactly like a castle. With strong walls and a locked door." As Richard showed them the panic room Grace had insisted on installing, just in case, she'd said, and he thought she was being paranoid, he realized how many of his wife's seemingly irrational precautions had been preparations for a danger he'd never seen coming. She'd known. Grace had known Victor would retaliate eventually. She'd been preparing for battle even while Richard remained obliviously confident in his business partner's integrity. His phone buzzed. "James Whitmore, FBI wants to meet with you immediately. They've arrested Victor Dane for questioning." "It's happening, Richard." Relief and dread warred in Richard's chest. The truth was coming out, but the cost would be catastrophic. Collins Industries would likely collapse. His reputation would be damaged by association. Everything he'd built over 20 years could disappear. But as he watched Ella and Emma explore their new safe room, exclaiming over the books and games he'd had Mrs. Patterson stock there, Richard found he didn't care about the empire anymore. Grace had been right all along. Real wealth wasn't in what you owned. It was in who you saved. "Mr. Richard." Ella tugged on his sleeve. "When this is over, when the bad men can't hurt us anymore, can we stay here? With you?" He looked down at her hopeful face, at Emma standing protectively beside her sister, and felt something shift irrevocably in his heart. "Yes," he said. "You can stay. I'm going to make sure of it." Even if he had to burn down his entire world to keep that promise. Downstairs, Detective Morrison was waiting. "The FBI wants to interview the girls about their mother's connection to Victor Dane. Are they up for that?" Richard thought about everything these children had already endured. Then he thought about Grace's final message, "Please don't let Victor win." "They will be," he said. "But I'm going with them. And anyone who tries to intimidate or pressure them will answer to me." Morrison almost smiled. "Your wife really did marry a good man, didn't she?" She married a fool who took 20 years to understand what really mattered. Richard glanced up the stairs where the girls' laughter echoed from their new fortress. "But I'm learning." "Better late than never," Morrison said. As Richard prepared for the FBI interview, for the media onslaught, for the collapse of his business empire, he felt something he hadn't experienced since Grace's death. Purpose. His wife had spent her last year fighting for 2 innocent children against impossible odds. She'd sacrificed her reputation, her safety, and ultimately her life. Now it was his turn to finish what she'd started. And this time, he wouldn't look away from the truth. No matter how much it cost. The FBI field office in downtown Manhattan was a fortress of concrete and glass, its sterile corridors designed to intimidate. Richard walked beside Special Agent Marcus Reed, a tall black man in his 50s with the weary eyes of someone who'd seen too much human cruelty, while Ella and Emma held his hands so tightly his fingers went numb. Detective Morrison and Linda Chen followed behind, along with James Whitmore and a child psychologist named Dr. Rachel Kim who'd been called in to ensure the interview didn't traumatize the girls further. "The girls will be interviewed separately," Agent Reed explained as they entered a conference room painted in soothing blues. "We found that twins sometimes defer to each other rather than providing independent accounts." "No." Emma's voice was sharp with fear. "We stay together." "Emma," Richard began. "We stay together," she repeated, her body trembling. "Ella can't do it alone." Reed exchanged glances with Dr. Kim, who nodded subtly. "All right. We can work with that. But Mr. Collins, you'll need to observe from behind the glass. We need to ensure the girl's testimony isn't influenced." Richard wanted to argue, but he saw the logic. He knelt before the twins. "I'll be right there, watching through that window. You won't be able to see me, but I'll see you. And if anything becomes too much, you just say, 'Stop,' and we'll take a break. Okay?" Ella nodded, but her lip trembled. Emma's jaw was set, but Richard could see terror beneath the bravado. "You're the bravest people I know," he told them. "Your mother would be so proud." As he moved behind the one-way glass, James joined him. "The evidence you provided is solid, Richard. Victor's lawyers are scrambling, but the paper trail is damning. However what? The FBI has questions about Grace's death." Richard's blood ran cold. "What kind of questions?" Before James could answer, the interview began. Dr. Kim sat with the girls, her manner gentle and unhurried. She started with simple questions: their favorite colors, their memories of their mother, what they liked to do together. Slowly, carefully, she moved to harder topics. "Can you tell me about Mr. Henderson's house?" Dr. Kim asked. Emma's hand found Ella's. "It was cold. He didn't let us use the heater even when it snowed." "And were there other children there?" "3 boys. They were older. They took our food sometimes." Ella's voice was barely audible. "Mr. Henderson said we should be grateful. That nobody else would want twins because we're too expensive." Richard's hands clenched into fists. He'd already instructed James to ensure Kenneth Henderson faced charges, but hearing the girls describe their treatment made him want to personally destroy the man. "Did Mr. Henderson ever hurt you?" Dr. Kim asked gently. Silence. Then Ella pulled up her shirt slightly, revealing fading bruises along her ribs, yellow and green now, but clearly from a significant impact. "He pushed her down the stairs," Emma said, her voice shaking with suppressed rage. "Because she wet the bed. She was scared of the dark and he wouldn't let us have a nightlight and she had an accident." "Did you report this to anyone?" The social worker. But she said Ella was clumsy, that Mr. Henderson wouldn't hurt us on purpose. Emma's cynicism was heartbreaking. Nobody listens to kids. Dr. Kim nodded, acknowledging the injustice. I'm listening now. And I believe you. The girl's shoulders relaxed slightly. Let's talk about your mother, Dr. Kim continued. You said she told you about Mommy Grace. Mommy said if anything happened to her, we should find Mommy Grace. Ella pulled a crumpled piece of paper from her pocket, the map Richard had heard about but never seen. She drew this for us. It shows the cemetery, the stone with the name Collins, everything. Dr. Kim examined the map. Your mother was very smart to prepare this. Did she tell you why you might need to find Mommy Grace? The girls exchanged glances. Finally, Emma spoke. Because of the bad man. The one who fired Mommy and made her sick. Did your mother tell you his name? Victor. Emma's voice hardened. She said he was dangerous. That he hurt people who tried to tell the truth. Behind the glass, Richard watched Agent Reed's expression sharpen. He leaned forward slightly, clearly interested. Emma, this is very important, Dr. Kim said carefully. Did your mother ever say that Victor might try to hurt Mommy Grace? Emma's face crumpled. She said Mommy Grace was in danger because she was helping us. She said the bad man might. It's okay. Take your time. She said the bad man might make Mommy Grace have an accident. The room went utterly silent. Richard's world tilted. An accident. Grace had died in a car accident, a truck running a red light, the police had said. Instantaneous. No witnesses except the truck driver, who claimed his brakes had failed. His legs nearly gave out. James caught his arm, steadying him. When did your mother tell you this? Dr. Kim asked, her voice carefully neutral. The week before she died, Ella whispered. She was really sick then. She could barely talk. But she made us memorize everything, Mommy Grace's name, where to find her, what to do if we were in trouble. And did she say anything else about the accident? Emma nodded slowly. She said if something happened to Mommy Grace, we should still find Mr. Collins. She said he was a good man who just didn't know the truth yet. She said we had to help him see. Agent Reed entered the observation room, his expression grim. Mr. Collins, we need to talk. Richard could barely hear him over the roaring in his ears. Grace's accident wasn't an accident. We don't know that yet. Yes, we do. Richard's voice was raw. Victor had her killed. Because she was about to expose him. Because she was protecting those children and their mother's evidence. We're opening an investigation into your wife's death, Reed said carefully. The truck driver who hit her, a man named Thomas Garrett, was paid $300,000 2 days after the accident. The money was wired from a Cayman Islands account we've now traced to one of Victor Dane's shell companies. The words landed like physical blows. Grace hadn't just died, she'd been murdered. Killed by the man Richard had trusted like a brother, the man who'd stood at her funeral and delivered a eulogy praising her kindness. I want immunity for those girls, Richard heard himself say. Complete immunity for anything their mother may have done, any evidence she may have obtained illegally. In exchange, you get everything, all of Clara's documents, the girl's testimony, my full cooperation. Mr. Collins, we can't. Yes, you can. Richard turned to face Reed, and whatever the agent saw in his expression made him step back slightly. Those children have lost everything. Their mother, their home, their safety. They've been beaten and starved and treated like unwanted baggage. The only thing they have left is the hope that their mother's sacrifice meant something. That Grace's protection meant something. I understand your feelings. No, you don't. Because if you did, you wouldn't be standing here negotiating while the man who murdered my wife walks around with lawyers and bail bonds. Richard's voice dropped to something dangerous. I have resources, Agent Reed. Money, connections, influence. I can make this investigation very easy or very difficult. So I'll ask once more, immunity for Ella and Emma Bennett, full protection status, and priority placement for guardianship in my care. In exchange, you get everything you need to bury Victor Dane for the rest of his life. Reed studied him for a long moment. Then he pulled out his phone. I need to call my supervisor. While they waited, Richard returned to watching the girls through the glass. Dr. Kim had moved on to lighter topics, letting them draw pictures of their mother. Both drew the same image, a woman with long dark hair, smiling, her arms outstretched. Between them, in both drawings, was another figure. A woman with Grace's distinctive auburn curls, also smiling, also reaching out. Two mothers. Two angels who tried to save them from the cruelty of powerful men. My supervisor approved the immunity deal, Reed said, returning. But there's a condition. We need the girls to identify Victor Dane from a photo array. If they can confirm their mother showed them his picture, warned them about him specifically, it establishes premeditation for witness intimidation and potentially conspiracy to commit murder. No. Richard's response was immediate. They're 8 years old. I won't let you put them through. It's a photo array, Mr. Collins. Not a lineup. They look at pictures, point to anyone they recognize. It takes 5 minutes. And when Victor's lawyers get hold of that testimony, when they put those children on a witness stand and tear apart their credibility, when the media camps outside my house and turns their trauma into entertainment. Richard shook his head. Find another way. There is no other way. Not if you want Victor charged with your wife's murder. The choice crystallized before Richard with brutal clarity. Justice for Grace, or safety for the girls. The truth, or their childhood. His need for vengeance, or their need for peace. Grace's letter echoed in his mind, please don't let them grow up alone. She hadn't asked him to avenge her. She'd asked him to protect them. Then Victor doesn't get charged with murder, Richard said quietly. The fraud charges will put him away for 20 years. That's enough. Mr. Collins, your wife was killed. And she would never forgive me for traumatizing 2 innocent children to satisfy my need for revenge. Richard's voice broke. She spent her last year protecting them. I won't undo that for the sake of seeing Victor in a cell instead of a courtroom. James put a hand on his shoulder. Richard, you don't have to decide this now. Yes, I do. Because if I wait, if I think about it, I'll choose wrong. I'll choose my anger over their safety. Richard looked at his lawyer. File the guardianship papers. Today. I want those girls legally protected before Victor's lawyers start looking for leverage. Reed's expression softened with something like respect. Your wife chose well, Mr. Collins. Not many people would walk away from justice like this. I'm not walking away from justice. I'm choosing a different kind. Richard looked through the glass at Ella and Emma, still drawing, still healing. Grace taught me that. The interview concluded 20 minutes later. When the girls emerged, they ran to Richard and wrapped their arms around him. He held them, feeling their small bodies shake with relief that it was over. "You did so well," he whispered. "So incredibly well. Your mother would be so proud." "Will the bad man go to jail now?" Ella asked. "Yes. For a very long time." "Good." Emma's voice was fierce. "He shouldn't hurt any more mommies." As they left the FBI building, Richard's phone exploded with notifications. The news had broken: Victor Dane arrested, Collins Industries stock plummeting, board members resigning, media demanding statements. His empire was collapsing in real time. But walking between Ella and Emma, their small hands in his, Richard found he didn't care about any of it. He'd lost Grace. He'd lost his business partner, his company's reputation, probably most of his fortune. But he'd found something worth more than all of it. He'd found what Grace had been trying to teach him all along, that love wasn't about possession or legacy or empire. It was about showing up. About choosing the vulnerable over the powerful. About sacrifice that expected nothing in return. "Mr. Richard." Ella tugged his hand. "Can we go home now?" Home. They'd called it home. "Yes," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "Let's go home." And for the first time since Grace's death, the word meant something again. 6 months later, Richard stood in family court wearing a simple navy suit instead of his usual custom-tailored Italian designs. The courtroom was smaller than he'd expected, more like a large conference room with wood paneling and fluorescent lights that hummed softly overhead. Nothing like the grand legal dramas he'd seen on television. Judge Catherine Morrison, no relation to the detective, presided from a modest bench, reading through the thick file of his guardianship petition. She was in her 60s, with steel-gray hair and eyes that missed nothing. Beside Richard sat Ella and Emma, dressed in matching blue dresses Mrs. Patterson had helped them pick out. They'd grown in 6 months, put on healthy weight, gained color in their cheeks, started smiling more easily. But now, facing the woman who would decide their future, both girls were rigid with fear. Richard reached over and squeezed their hands. "Whatever happens," he whispered, "I'm not giving up." Emma nodded, trying to look brave. Ella's eyes were already filling with tears. The past 6 months had been the most chaotic and transformative of Richard's life. Victor Dane had been indicted on 14 counts of fraud, money laundering, and racketeering. The trial was scheduled for next year, and federal prosecutors were confident of conviction. But without the girls' testimony about their mother's warnings, the murder investigation into Grace's death had stalled. Thomas Garrett, the truck driver, had died of a heart attack in his jail cell before he could be pressured to testify. Victor would pay for his financial crimes. But he'd likely never answer for Grace's death. Richard had made peace with that choice. Mostly. Collins Industries had collapsed spectacularly. The board had forced Richard to resign, shareholders had sued, and the company had been broken up and sold to competitors at bargain prices. Richard's personal fortune had been cut in half by legal fees, settlements, and the financial restructuring needed to separate his assets from the corporate wreckage. He'd gone from billionaire to merely wealthy, still privileged beyond most people's wildest dreams, but no longer the titan of industry he'd once been. And he'd never felt freer. The Grace Collins Foundation had been vindicated after a thorough FBI investigation proved Grace's missing funds had gone to saving Clara Bennett's life. Monica Foster had taken over as director, and the foundation was expanding faster than ever, funded by donors who admired Grace's courage in standing up to corruption. But none of that mattered if Judge Morrison decided Richard wasn't fit to be Ella and Emma's guardian. "Mr. Collins," the judge said, looking up from her papers. I've reviewed your petition, the home study reports, the psychological evaluations, and the testimonies from Mrs. Patterson, Dr. Kim, Detective Morrison, and numerous other character witnesses. Richard's heart hammered. Beside him, Emma grabbed his hand so tightly her nails dug into his palm. I've also reviewed the reports from the girls' therapists, their school records from the private academy you enrolled them in, and their own statements about their wishes. Judge Morrison removed her reading glasses. This is an unusual case. You're not a family member. You'd never met these children before they appeared at your late wife's grave. Most of your connection to them is based on your wife's secret intervention in their mother's life, intervention you knew nothing about. That's correct, Your Honor, Richard said, his voice steady despite the terror coursing through him. However, the judge continued, I've also reviewed evidence that these children were failed repeatedly by the system designed to protect them. They were placed in an abusive foster home despite multiple red flags. Their reports of abuse were dismissed. When they ran away to survive, they were treated as delinquents rather than victims. Richard felt a flicker of hope. The question before this court is simple: what is in the best interest of Ella and Emma Bennett? Judge Morrison looked directly at the girls. And I believe the people best qualified to answer that question are Ella and Emma themselves. She gestured to the bailiff, who adjusted a microphone on the witness stand. Girls, would you please come up here? I'd like to ask you a few questions. Emma stood immediately, her protective instincts overriding her fear. Ella followed, and together they climbed into the witness box, Emma standing while Ella sat, their hands still clasped. Ella, Judge Morrison's voice gentled. I know this is scary. But I need you to be honest with me, okay? Nobody will be mad at you for telling the truth. Both girls nodded. Do you like living with Mr. Collins? Yes, they said in unison. Can you tell me why? Ella spoke first, her voice soft but clear. He makes us feel safe. He doesn't yell or hit us. He reads to us every night before bed. And he kept his promise, Emma added fiercely. He said he wouldn't let anyone hurt us again, and he didn't. Even when it was hard. Even when people were mean to him on TV. Richard's throat tightened. He tried to shield them from the media coverage of Victor's arrest and his company's collapse, but they'd seen some of it. They'd heard the reporters calling Richard a fool for trusting Victor, questioning his judgment, suggesting he'd been complicit in the fraud. Has Mr. Collins ever made you feel afraid? Judge Morrison asked. Never, Emma said firmly. Do you understand that if I grant this guardianship, Mr. Collins will be legally responsible for you until you're adults? That he'll make decisions about your education, your health, where you live. We know, Ella said. Dr. Kim explained it to us. And is that what you want? Both girls nodded, tears streaming down their faces. More than anything, Emma whispered. He's not like Mommy or Mommy Grace. But he loves us anyway. We can feel it. Judge Morrison's professional composure cracked slightly. She blinked rapidly, then cleared her throat. Thank you, girls. You can return to your seats. As Ella and Emma climbed down, Judge Morrison shuffled her papers, taking a moment to compose herself. Mr. Collins, she said finally, please stand. Richard rose, his legs unsteady. This court has heard testimony about your character, your resources, your commitment to these children. We've also heard concerns, that you're motivated by grief rather than genuine parental love, that you're trying to replace your late wife with surrogate children, that 6 months isn't long enough to establish a true parent-child relationship. Richard's heart sank. However, the judge continued, I've been doing this job for 23 years. I've seen hundreds of guardianship cases. And I've learned that families aren't defined by biology or duration. They're defined by commitment, sacrifice, and love. She looked at him directly, her expression softening. You've sacrificed your career, your reputation, and your fortune to protect two children you barely knew. You've put their emotional well-being above your desire for justice. You've shown up, day after day, even when it was hard. That's what parenthood is, Mr. Collins. And from what I've seen, you're doing it remarkably well. Richard couldn't breathe. Therefore, this court grants your petition for permanent guardianship of Ella Marie Bennett and Emma Rose Bennett, effective immediately. Judge Morrison smiled, a rare break in judicial formality. Congratulations, Mr. Collins. You're officially a father. The courtroom erupted. James Whitmore was grinning. Mrs. Patterson, who'd taken the day off to attend, was weeping openly. Linda Chen from CPS was smiling and making notes. But Richard only saw the girls. Ella launched herself into his arms, sobbing. Emma followed, her fierce composure finally crumbling into the relief of a child who'd been holding herself together too long. We get to stay. Ella gasped between tears. Really stay? Forever. Forever, Richard promised, holding them both. You're mine now. My daughters. Nothing will ever change that. Can we call you Dad? Emma asked, her voice muffled against his shoulder. The question broke something in Richard's chest, the last wall he'd built around his grief, the final barrier between who he'd been and who he was becoming. I would be honored, he whispered. 3 weeks later, Richard stood at Grace's grave with Ella and Emma. It was the first time they'd returned since that frozen morning 6 months ago. The cemetery was transformed by spring, cherry blossoms drifting like pink snow, grass green and lush, birds singing in the oak trees. We brought her flowers, Ella said, placing a bouquet of white lilies, Grace's favorites, against the headstone. Dad said she'd like that. Emma added a handmade card decorated with crayon drawings. We made this in art class. It says, "Thank you for saving us." Richard knelt beside them, running his fingers over Grace's engraved name. I wish you could see them now, he said quietly. They're thriving. Emma got the highest math score in her grade. Ella joined the school choir and has a solo in the spring concert. They're everything you believed they could be. Does Mommy Grace know we call you Dad now? Ella asked. I think she does. I think she's very happy about it. Emma was quiet for a moment, then asked the question Richard knew had been weighing on her. Dad? Are you still sad that Mommy Grace isn't here? Richard considered lying, giving them the comforting answer. But these girls deserve truth. Yes, he said. I'll always be sad that she's gone. But I'm also grateful, for the time we had, for what she taught me, for the gift she gave me in bringing you into my life. Sadness and gratitude can exist together. Like how we're sad about our mommy but happy we found you? Ella asked. Exactly like that. Emma pulled something from her pocket, the silver necklaces Richard had found in Grace's safe deposit box, the ones with their names engraved. He'd given them to the girls after the guardianship hearing. We wanted to show Mommy Grace that we got her present, Emma said, fastening the chain around her neck. Ella did the same. As sunlight caught the silver hearts, Richard felt Grace's presence as surely as if she stood beside them. Not a ghost, but a legacy, love that continued beyond death, rippling outward to touch lives she'd never lived to see. Girls, there's one more thing. Richard pulled an envelope from his jacket. I received this yesterday. It was scheduled to be delivered 1 year after Grace's death. She set it up before she died. Inside was a letter, and a photograph. The letter was addressed to all three of them, to Richard, Ella, and Emma, my family. Richard read aloud, his voice breaking. If you're reading this together, it means I succeeded. It means Richard found you, protected you, and loved you the way I always knew he could. Richard, my love, you always said I had too much faith in people. That I saw goodness where others saw only flaws. But I was right about you. I always knew that beneath the ruthless businessman was a man capable of profound compassion. You just needed a reason to find him. Ella and Emma gave you that reason. They reminded you what really matters. I'm sorry I kept secrets. I'm sorry I made choices without you. But I'm not sorry for protecting these girls, or for believing you'd finish what I started. To my angels, Ella and Emma, you were the brightest part of my last year. When everything felt dark and dangerous, you reminded me why the fight mattered. Your courage, your resilience, your unshakable love for each other, you taught me more about strength than I ever could have taught you. I'm sorry I couldn't keep all my promises. I'm sorry I couldn't stay to watch you grow up. But I kept the most important promise, I made sure you'd never be alone. Richard will give you everything I couldn't, stability, safety, a home where you're cherished. He'll make mistakes because parenting is impossible to do perfectly. But he'll show up, day after day, even when it's hard. That's what love is. Take care of each other. All three of you. And remember, real wealth isn't in what we own. It's in who we save, who we love, who we become for each other. You three are my greatest treasure. My legacy. My proof that love is stronger than death. Forever yours, Grace. When Richard finished reading, all three of them were crying. Emma hugged him from one side, Ella from the other, and they stood together in the spring sunshine, mourning and celebrating simultaneously. The photograph showed Grace at her desk, writing in her journal. On the desk beside her were two things, a framed photo of Richard from their wedding day, and a crayon drawing clearly made by young children, two stick figures holding hands with a taller figure between them, all three smiling under a rainbow. She'd known. Somehow, Grace had known exactly how this would end. Thank you, Richard whispered to the gravestone, to the memory, to the ghost of the woman who changed everything. Thank you for teaching me what really matters. Thank you for our daughters. A breeze rustled the cherry blossoms, sending petals dancing around them like pink confetti. And Richard could have sworn he heard Grace's laughter, joyful, triumphant, free. 2 years later, Richard stood in the grand ballroom of the Plaza Hotel, watching as 500 people celebrated the renamed Grace and Clara Bennett Foundation. The event had raised $12 million in a single night, money that would fund safe housing for domestic violence survivors, legal aid for whistleblowers, and emergency support for children aging out of foster care. Monica Foster was at the podium, announcing the foundation's newest initiative, the Ella and Emma Scholarship Program for twins in foster care. Richard didn't hear most of the speech. His attention was on his daughters, now 10 years old, confident and radiant in their formal dresses, as they stood beside Monica, preparing to say a few words. Emma spoke first, her voice clear and strong. Our mother used to tell us that the world was full of both bad people who hurt others and good people who helped. She said our job was to be the helpers. Ella continued, Mommy Grace was a helper. She saved our mom when nobody else would. She protected us even though it was dangerous. And she gave us our dad, who teaches us every day how to be helpers too. They'd written the speech themselves, practicing for weeks. Richard had offered to help, but they'd insisted on doing it alone. So tonight, Emma concluded, we want to say thank you to everyone who supports this foundation, who believes that helping people matters more than making money or being powerful. Our moms would be proud of you. We're proud of you, Ella added. The ballroom erupted in applause. Richard's chest felt too full, too tight with pride and love and lingering grief that had mellowed into something bittersweet but bearable. James Whitmore appeared at his elbow, grinning. Your daughters are natural public speakers. Future politicians, maybe. God help us all, Richard said, but he was smiling. How does it feel? James asked. 2 years ago, you were a billionaire businessman. Now you're a single dad running a charity. Any regrets? Richard watched Ella and Emma navigate the crowd, thanking donors with the poise Grace would have admired. They'd grown so much, Emma's protective fierceness had evolved into leadership skills, while Ella's gentle nature had revealed itself as profound empathy. They were extraordinary, these daughters who'd found him beside a grave on a frozen morning. Not a single one, Richard said honestly. Later that night, after the event ended and they'd returned home, Richard tucked the girls into bed, a ritual they'd never outgrown, though they'd probably stop requesting it soon. Growing up happened so fast. Dad? Emma asked as he turned off the light. Do you think our moms can see us? From heaven or wherever they are? Richard sat on the edge of her bed, considering the question. 2 years ago, he would have dismissed it as childish fantasy. Now, he understood that some questions didn't need empirical answers. I think, he said carefully, that love doesn't end when people die. It continues in the people they touched, the changes they made, the choices they inspired. So in that way, yes, your moms see you every time you choose kindness. Every time you help someone. Every time you remember what they taught you. That's a very dad answer, Ella giggled from the other bed. Is it? Richard smiled. Should I have just said yes? No, Emma said. Your answer was better. More true. After they fell asleep, Richard returned to his study, Grace's old office, which he'd finally made his own. Her books still lined the walls, but now they shared space with the girls' artwork and school projects. Her desk held his laptop and financial reports for the foundation. The room had changed, evolved, become something new while honoring what it had been. Like him. Richard pulled out the journal he'd started keeping, a habit inherited from Grace. In it, he documented the girl's progress, his own struggles and victories as a parent, reflections on grief and healing and unexpected joy. He wrote, Today Ella and Emma spoke at the Foundation Gala. Grace, you should have seen them, so brave, so articulate, so completely themselves. They're not trying to be like you or Clara. They're becoming their own people, shaped by your love but not defined by your loss. I finally understand what you tried to tell me in that last letter. Real wealth isn't in what we own, it's in who we save, who we love, who we become for each other. I was a billionaire once. I had power and influence and a reputation that opened doors. Now I'm just a dad. I help with homework and attend parent-teacher conferences and make pancakes on Saturday mornings. My greatest achievement is that 2 girls who'd lost everything feel safe enough to call me dad. And Grace, my love, this is the richest I've ever been. He closed the journal and walked to the window, looking out at the gardens where Ella and Emma spent hours playing, where Mrs. Patterson grew vegetables and flowers, where life continued in all its messy, beautiful complexity. Somewhere in the night, beyond the manicured lawns and the city lights, Grace rested beneath pink granite and cherry blossoms. Clara lay in a modest grave Richard visited monthly with the girls, bringing fresh flowers and updates on their lives. Two women who'd sacrificed everything for children who weren't biologically theirs. Two women who'd believed in love as action rather than sentiment. Two women who taught Richard Collins that the truest measure of wealth was counted in lives saved, not dollars earned. He'd found two homeless twin girls at his wife's grave, and their words had left him shocked. But what shocked him more, in the end, was how completely they'd changed him. How completely they'd saved him. Just as Grace had known they would. "Thank you," Richard whispered into the darkness. "For everything." And in the quiet of the house, in the soft breathing of sleeping children, in the whisper of wind through trees, in the steady beat of his own transformed heart, he felt Grace's answer. "You're welcome, my love. Now live." So he did. Richard Collins lost his wife, his empire, and his old identity, but found purpose, family, and the kind of wealth that truly matters. Ella and Emma Bennett lost their mother but gained a father who honors her memory by living the values she died protecting. And Grace Collins's legacy lives on, not in monuments or foundations, but in the daily choice to love fiercely, protect the vulnerable, and believe that one person's compassion can change the world.
Thank you for watching. Want to show me some love and keep the videos coming? Simple: like and subscribe. Ready for the next thrill? Click on the video popping up on your screen right now and enjoy more. See you in the comments.